Hello, everybody, and welcome to your very first class of Introduction to Sociology. So, a few things before we get started. One of them is when I began recording lectures for online courses, I very quickly realized that I cannot record a lecture perfectly. It is not going to happen. But that is exactly what would happen in class. I might stumble over my words or need to rephrase things. So, I'm not going to worry about that. Second is in terms of background noise, maybe my dog will bark, I'll quiet her down. My son might say something, but again, it's just not worth it to go back and start re recording the whole thing. So, you're going to get an authentic experience, even though this course is online. Now, the purpose of this chapter in the textbook is to really familiarize you with the subject of sociology, to introduce what sociology is and how it relates to a whole bunch of subjects in society. So please don't be intimidated. If you've never studied anything to do with it before, don't be intimidated flipping through the textbook and looking at what is to come, because I want to present information to you in as clear and simple and uncomplicated a manner as possible. Studying sociology does not need to be complicated. Yes, there's going to be some terms or concepts that you might have to think about a bit to really understand them, and you'll need to rely on examples to help you. But as we proceed through the course, you will see that I like to always do two things with students to help them understand. First, I like to reword what I'm saying in more than one way, to rephrase it in a manner different than in the textbook, and to try to always reword it in what I would call everyday words instead of a more complicated academic manner. I find that doing this really helps students so that when they look again at the more academic terminology, it just seems to make sense. The second thing I like to do, as I said, is to provide a lot of examples that I feel or I think students can relate to. This is also really effective in understanding what we're talking about. And this will help you to appreciate that what we are talking about is actually relevant. All of it actually has real life applications, so that when you watch the news or see an article about something online, or somebody makes a comment on Facebook or Instagram about something going on in the world, you will naturally relate it in your head to something we've talked about in class and have a more complete understanding about it. And I'm also going to make a recommendation to you that might sound a bit strange at first, but it really does go along with what I've just said. If you're having difficulty understanding something, whether it's a theory overall as a whole or just one particular part of it, go to YouTube and search it. And I know that's probably an odd recommendation from a professor. There are whole series of videos on YouTube about sociology, as well as other disciplines that people have created. Some are high school teachers, some are college or university professors, and some are students who have had to complete a video as part of an assignment. These are usually not very long, and they usually go a long way to helping explain terms and concepts. They can really help summarize a theory and kind of pull it all together. And they can rephrase what you've already been taught in a different way. And overall, the hundreds and hundreds of students that I've interacted with have told me that they find the educational videos on YouTube actually pretty useful. So, having given you all that introduction, our first class is focused on sociological theory, something that students will tell me they sometimes have a difficult time grasping. And there are short 3 to 4 minute videos on YouTube about each theory, explaining them in a concise manner from beginning to end. So it could be very useful. Now, when you read the very beginning of chapter 1, the author tells you how he himself first became interested in sociology. You might never write a textbook about Soch, but by the end of the course, you will have a very good understanding of it, and you will be comfortable talking about it, thinking about things you see every day in a sociological manner, at least sometimes. For example, several years ago, I was in an airport waiting to take a flight back home. This was pre-COVID, and it was extremely crowded. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in one place in this small little airport, all waiting to get checked in and go through security as quickly as possible, but the computer system had shut down. So there was a wait while the system was rebooted, and then they had this huge backlog of people. So the whole process took about 3 hours in really hot weather. And then we all waited an additional 4 more hours for our flight to be called because there was another delay. After waiting 7 hours, we were told it was canceled and rescheduled for the next day because of a problem with the plane. Now, needless to say, I would prefer to have it rescheduled rather than flying in a plane that had a problem. However, of course, in the moment, people were not happy about this, and neither was I. But at the same time, I was acutely aware of how people interacted with each other, how they interacted with airport staff, and how all this interaction affected the other individually as well as the overall atmosphere. I just couldn't stop myself from considering what was going on around me from a sociological perspective. So, sociology as itself, the most basic definition, is the systematic study of human behavior in a social context. And I actually like this definition because it's very simple and straightforward. What this means is that we study how people act, how they behave and communicate and interpret each other and the world around them. But as sociologists, we do this from an organized way and from a societal perspective. So we don't just look at individual people. We look at these individual people as they exist within society. So I want you to imagine a goldfish in a bowl on the counter, and you're going to study the fish. But you don't just study the fish itself, do you? You study the fish and the environment they're in, within the context of the bowl, within the context of their world, within the context of their society. How is the fish affected by the bowl? By the shape of the bowl, by where the bowl is placed in a room, by how much sunlight the fish does or does not receive, by what is in the bowl with the fish, whether it's plastic plants or real plants or those little colored rocks you sometimes see in fish tanks. How is the fish affected by the water? By how clean or dirty the water is, whether it's tap water or purified water out of a bottle, by how often the water is changed. We'd look at whether there's other fish in the bowl. How do they interact? How do they affect each other? And then with all of the examples I've just given, we would also look at how the fish then turns around and affects all those issues. And this is exactly what society does. I was going to say, this is sociology in a nutshell, or we could say this is sociology in a fishbowl. We as sociologists study the way people act within the context of the society they live in. So sure, we might study somebody as an individual, but we might also study someone as part of a small group. We might study a family. We might study people within a large group, or maybe even an entire community. Maybe an entire society. The important thing here is that human behavior is always studied within the context of society. That is a sociological perspective. And not just Canadian society or American society, any society in the world. In your text, it says, the organization of the social world opens some opportunities and closes others. Now, this might sound complicated to you. It might sound kind of philosophical, but it really isn't. I want you to think about it. What this means is that the structure of the society you live in, the social structure, will in many ways determine what you can and can't do. It will, in a way, regulate your life. And we probably don't think of ourselves and our choices being determined by the social institutions in our society, especially routine day in and day out living. But it's true, as it would be true no matter what society you are living in. So, specifically, social structures are stable patterns of social relations. So, a social structure doesn't just refer to a building, it refers to social structures that are stable patterns of social relations. And I'm going to focus on our own Canadian society as an example of this. So, think about Canadian society. We have several social structures. Again, some you can actually physically see, and some you can't. And what these social structures do is they keep society going. Sorry, one of my cats is making a venture over here. No, Gus, you have to go away. So these social structures keep society going. They regulate how our society operates and how everyone in society interacts. This provides us stability as individuals, and it provides stability for our society as a whole. So, for example, the government is a social structure that in many ways determines how our society functions on a daily basis, as well as on a long-term basis. And the government in every society does the same. Now, you can see government buildings. You can read governmental rules and regulations. You can create or see signs for election. These are all evidence of our government. The education system is a social structure that determines what Canadian children should learn, what they should be taught in a systematic manner year after year. Our health system is a social structure. The legal system is a social structure. And again, you can actually see parts of these social structures. So you can see schools and teachers. You can see hospitals or a doctor and read the rules and regulations of going to those. You can see a courthouse or a jail. And if I were to ask you what these are, you could probably explain them pretty easily. If I asked you, what is the education system? Your answer would be something like, well, it's a system that teaches all of our children in the same way. So we can easily define this social structure of the education system. And I think we all have a pretty clear understanding of it. But there are other social structures in our society that also help to maintain society and keep it going that are not as easily identified. And what I mean is, you can't always see physical evidence of them, like religion, no matter what that particular religion may be. As a whole, religion is a social structure that does contribute to determining the way our society is, how it runs, how it operates. So, another way of saying that is religion contributes to the regulation of our society. Now, we won't be studying religion specifically in this course, although there is a chapter about it in the textbook if you want to take a look. Religion used to have a much larger role in Canadian society, but over time, its role as a social structure has declined. So, when the French and the English first came to what is now known as Canada, religion was a major linchpin holding society together that had a direct and immediate effect on life. In current society, it's not as big of an influence, but it does continue to be a major social structure. Where am I? Culture is a social structure. The socially transmitted practices, languages, symbols, beliefs, values, ideologies, and material objects that people create to deal with real life problems. Now, this sounds really complicated, but it's really not. We'll be looking at culture specifically in the future. Culture is a social structure that, again, you can sometimes see evidence of it, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just feel it, you experience it. So it's not necessarily something you can easily define. Family is a main social structure in Canadian society, and the concept of a family is a social institution. This is the subject of one of the chapters in the textbook, and there are many kinds of families that are socially and legally accepted in Canadian society. A nuclear family with a man and woman at least living together, if not legally married, with at least one child. There may be a traditional nuclear family in which the woman does not work outside the home. There are extended families, step families, blended families, families with same sex parents. The key here is that no matter which specific form it takes, the family as a social institution acts to keep our society going. The family as a social institution keeps society stable and strong. And it really does act as one of the foundations of our society. So, in sociology, what we do is study people within the context of the society they live in. We study in part the social structures that provide stable patterns of social relations. Now, how do these big social structures interact with Canadians on an individual level? So, how do they affect you personally? How do they regulate you and everybody else? Let's look at marriage as an example. That's something that everybody has a general understanding of. So in Canada, we all have the freedom to marry who we want to. Yes, a person may feel pressured by their family to marry a certain person or to not marry a certain person based on whether they have a culture similar to yours, whether they come from a similar racial or ethnic or religious background. And let's be honest, you may also be pressured based on what their economic status is. But in general, we all have the freedom to marry who we want to, or of course, to not marry anybody. Strict arranged marriages are not an ethnic or cultural or legal norm in Canada. But it hasn't always been like this. Same sex marriage was not legalized in Canada until 2005. In 2003, some provinces began to legalize same sex marriage, but it wasn't until 2005 that the federal Civil Marriage Act made same sex marriage legal across all of Canada. Even so, some religions continued to restrict church marriage ceremonies to opposite sex couples. So prior to the law being prohibited or restricted or affected, what people as individuals could do regarding marriage was different. The legal system, which is one of the social structures in our society, directly regulated who you could marry, and as an extension of that, who people could start a legally recognized family with. The legal system also used to limit who could adopt a child so that same-sex couples were excluded from that as well. That has since changed. So our social structure, the legal system, affected another social structure, the family, and this was also affected by religion. Now, I also want to point out that although we have the freedom to marry who we want, we are actually still restricted, even though most of us don't think of these as restrictions because we're used to them and because we agree with them. So, for example, in Canada, you cannot marry a close blood relative like a brother or sister. An uncle cannot marry his niece. Two blood cousins cannot marry. You can't marry your own adult child. And there are also laws regarding what age a person has to be to legally consent to marriage. Federal law has set the absolute minimum marriageable age at 16 in Canada. And we have very strict rules about this. Our criminal code addresses the marriage of anybody under the age of 16, reading, anybody who celebrates, aids, or participates in a marriage rite or ceremony, knowing that one of the persons being married is under the age of 16 years, is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years. So, not only can somebody under 16 not be married, but at the same time, if you know somebody is or is going to, or you participate, you'll be charged as well. And you're probably thinking, well, of course you can't, Jennifer. Of course you can't get married under 16. But this is, in fact, something that regulates your life and everybody else's. Yes, not marrying a blood relative is a socially accepted norm, and it's something that's so firmly ingrained in Canadian society, nobody even thinks twice about it. But the law still regulates it. Now, to demonstrate just how strong an accepted cultural and social norm it is, think about this. In Ontario, 219 cases of forced marriage were reported between 2010 and 2012, with some of the victims as young as 12 years old. 219 cases in a 2-year span. Now, for another example, in Canadian society, we have the freedom to attend any school we want to, although, of course, cost will factor into this. But people don't have that freedom in every country. In some countries, the school you attend depends on your religion or your ethnicity, or whether you're male or female. The country will regulate who attends which school. In Canadian society, we have the freedom to live where we want to. We don't have to apply to the government for permission to move to a different area of the country, or even if we simply want to travel to a different part of Canada. If I wanted, I could buy a ticket to Edmonton to visit my brother, or I've never been to the East Coast, I could buy a ticket and go there. But people don't have that freedom in every country. In some countries, the government monitors travel and controls travel. So large-scale social structures in Canadian society, like the government, the legal system, regulate all of us. And by doing this, these social structures stabilize patterns of social interaction. They stabilize patterns of social relations. So keeping this idea of large social structures in mind, I want to introduce you to C. Wright Mills, who is a very well-known sociologist. He was an American, and he taught sociology at Columbia University. He wrote a book called The Sociological Imagination, first published in 1959. And I'm going to talk about this idea of a sociological imagination and restate what it is in several ways to help you understand it, because it's one of these concepts that can be difficult to grasp at first. And frankly, I remember way back in the olden times having a difficult time understanding it. So what the concept of a sociological imagination means is that you need to consider how history and society influence your life and circumstances. And I want to point out here that rather talk in the third person about the individual as the textbook does, I prefer to talk about it in more personal terms and refer to you and me. So, the sociological imagination means that you have to look beyond yourself and your own sense of how you got to be where you are in life. You're not just some isolated person unaffected by everything around you. You're not some completely isolated being, completely unaffected by what came before you. Either what came before you in history in general, or what came before you in a more personal sense, in your own community, in your own family. We are all affected by the forces of social class, by the forces of race, by the forces of gender and others. All of these different forces in society shape your behavior as an individual, and it shapes our behavior as a society. They did the same for every single person who existed before us, and they'll continue to do the same for every single person that exists after us. And it's only by understanding how all of these social forces intersect that we can understand the sociological imagination, how we are all connected to the world around us, the ways in which everyone have always been connected to the world around them, and the ways in which everyone will continue to be connected to the world around them. So, we are not unaffected by anything or anyone else. So, specifically, C. Wright Mills defined the sociological imagination as, quote, the awareness of the relationship between personal experience and the wider society. How your own biography, your own life story, your daily life is a result of everything that came before you, how it all interacted within a larger social context. You're affected by everything going on right now, individually and by a larger social context. And part of the sociological imagination means understanding the connection between individual issues in your life, how that affects social structures, and then how those social structures turn around and affect us again. So I'm going to give you some examples. Unemployment rates affect society as a whole. Of course they do. And they, in various ways, determine how society functions as a whole. At the same time, as an individual person who is unemployed experiences unemployment on a personal level. We could look at rates of young single mothers. They have an effect on society, and they are affected by wider society. If you are a victim of crime, you experience that on a personal level, but that's also affected by rates of crime on a wider level, and those rates are affected by society. So let's just pause for a second and summarize so far. So I told you that sociology is the systematic study of human behavior in a social context. Systematic study means it's systematic. We're not just kind of hopping around like bunnies going from subject to subject. We do approach research in a systematic scientific manner. We recognize that the organization of the social world opens some opportunities and closes others. So because of society provides us certain opportunities, but then it keeps us from other ones. And keeping with this idea, you also need to be aware that there are different levels of social structures that we are all surrounded by, as explained in the textbook. So, all these connections, all of this is going on all the time, whether you realize it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. This is the sociological imagination.